Greetings. A few days ago, posted some information on the RuntimeDNA forums in the reality section with regards to creating a single normal map that includes both a bump map for a skin as well as a displacement map for things like veins. The example I gave was in regards to using the Azalea skin that's available from DAZ 3D to create a demonic character. And I've had a couple of follow-up questions about how exactly this process works. I gave a text description of this, but sometimes seeing is easier on people than trying to figure it out from some steps in a text guide. This is my first attempt at making a video guide, so please forgive me if you have any problems. So to get started, I am using a tool known as Shader Map. This is version 2.1.1. This is the tool that I have been using for at least a year now to convert bumps, especially bumps, but also sometimes displacement maps into normal maps. And it also lets you obviously merge multiple maps into one resultant map, which is the goal of this video. I know there's another very popular tool called Crazy Bump. I don't own Crazy Bump. I have not tried the beta for it in a very long time. I'm assuming it's going to have a similar capability, but as to the exact steps or workflow, I'm not sure. But hopefully, while this video is done with Shader Map as the tool, it will give you the insight or you know what to look for in Crazy Bump if you're using Crazy Bump. I say this because Shader Map is a Windows-only tool, and actually in the forums, the person who was originally asking about this is a Mac user and so only has access to Crazy Bump. This is the default screen you get when you open a new project for Shader Map. You can use the options here to get started with just loading up one file and convert it into a normal map or do whatever you want. However, for this workflow, it's going to be easier if you come down here and you click on Advanced and you go directly into the map setup screen. And in here on the left, you can see we have boxes where we'll be able to drop nodes. And then over here are the types of nodes that we can drop. And I'm going to start off by adding in the diffuse maps for the Azalea figure. So if I click on that, looks like the recording is not showing you the pop-up for the source image, but that's fine. So here is the face, and then here is the limbs diffuse, and then the torso diffuse. So these are the three main diffuse maps that, if you're familiar with the figures used by programs like DAZ Studio and Poser, before Genesis 2, the humanoid figures are generally broken down into a head map, a torso map, and a limb map. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the bump maps for this skin set. They're denoted by a B at the end of the file name. So here is the bump for the head. And you'll notice I'm bringing them in as a displacement map node. They're not really, bump and displacement are both the same thing. They're height maps. So the fact that it's a quote-unquote bump map, don't get hung up on that. So next is the limbs bump. and I just am laying these out in a manner that's going to be, I find, most suitable. And then finally, we need the torso bump. Oh, torso. Whoop. I grabbed the torso again itself, not the bump. Torso bump. And now the next thing we use is we need some normal map nodes, and these are going to be us converting these bumps into normal maps. And so this is map as normal from displacement, and we can just click this 3 times and we're going to get 3 of them, and then going to drag the inputs so that each of them has their respective input. Now the next thing is that we're also trying to add in displacement maps, and so what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the displacement tool again, and I am going to load the displacement nodes. And in this case, I'm loading the files that end DDS, which is displacement for DAZ Studio, as opposed to the D files, which is displacement for Poser. So that's the displacement for the head. And then next up is displacement for the limbs. And then finally, we need displacement for the torso. And again, we are going to need normal from displacement nodes for each of these. And then to accomplish merging the bumps and the displacements, we're going to need blend normal maps nodes. So we're going to need 3 of these. So I'm going to drop the first one in. And here, our input 1 is actually correct. Our input 2 needs to be the displacement map coming from, or the normal map coming from the displacement. And I'm going to do that next. Is here and here, and then one more, and it's for the limb, or the torso rather. So that should be there. So we're blending for the face, the bump, and the displacement. We're blending for the limbs, the bump, and the displacement, and then for the torso, we're blending bump and displacement. And at that point, so at this point, we're now good. We've got all of our maps that we need and all of our nodes, and so I'm going to accept on that. And as you can see, shader map's spending a little bit of time here. It's loading in the various maps and doing its initial calculations. And I happen to be, well, let's click up here on the face mask. And you can see this is what the initial conversion of the face mask looks like. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up preview nodes, so that previews for each of these normal maps, so we can see what they actually kind of look like on a 3D surface. So the default is the sphere in here. The sphere is fine. I'm going to say add a standard. The diffuse is the face. The normal map is the bump normal. I'll say OK, and I drag that on here. And as we can see, the normal map right now is way too strong. And the way you adjust this in shader map is with this value over here called intensity. And it defaults to 100, which if you were using diffuse into a displacement from diffuse into normal is usually much more accurate, or what you want. But when you're loading up a pre-created bump map or height map of any sort, intensity is often very strong. And the trick here is that you start out with some low numbers, and it recalculated, and you can see now in the preview that there's almost no bump showing at all. That value is not strong enough. And what I usually do, typically, is and numbers in the range of 5 to 10 are what you want for most skin bump maps, I find. And as you bring these up one by one, eventually you start to see there's a little bit of detail showing up here. Go up again, a little bit more detail, and we'll go up one more. And now we actually get sort of a pop. And that's what I usually look for when converting bumps into displacement in shader map is when you get that increment where it pops a bunch. That's usually what you want, at least when you're going to be rendering with LuxRender. And if it's not correct, it's usually plus or minus 1. So the number of test iterations you have to do is very minor. And it happens to be that 9 is the value that I had experimented with and done some test renders to ensure that this was in fact the value that seems to work best. And so we can go ahead and create limb map. Again, the normals. Boom, and again, as you can see, way too strong, and we're going to use 9 again here. And you can see that even within the bump map, it includes some of the ridges of the, I don't know, veins or scars or whatever you want to call them for a demonoid figure. But the displacement map will really make those pop out. And so now I'm going to do the torso map, torso normal. And we bring that in, and again, as you can see, way too strong, but we bring this and we say 9, and voila. And if you like, you can go ahead and you can save out these normal maps, click the Save Set File Path, and save out normals for just the skin bump, and that's often what I'm doing. So now next we want to create previews for the displacement. So again, I'm going to say standard. I'm going to still use the diffuse maps, but I'm going to pick the normal from the displacement. And I'm going to bring that down. And as you can see, very different looking, and we've got these really punched out. It's a little bit too high. And when I did this before, what I ended up settling in on was a value of about 25 for the displacements. And again, these numbers for intensity are going to depend on your source maps, so you're going to have to experiment a little bit. These are not by any sense starter values. Again, the thing to do is start low and work your way up. If you're not seeing anything in chunks of 5 or 10, increment by 5 or 10 until you start seeing stuff, and then start doing it by 1. For bump maps, again, usually you need very, very small intensity numbers. But like I say, often in the range of 5 to 10. Anything above 10 on a bump map is usually probably very wrong. At least that's been my experience. So I'm going about, and here is the diffuse with the
new mail has arrived.
Displacement for the limbs, and again I'm going to set that to 25. And then I'm going to do a third one where I'm going to say torso normal map is the displacement normal map, the torso, and here we go. And again, 25. And as you can see, that got rid of a lot of the noise around the edges of the displacement map. If we come in, there's still a little bit there, but versus what it was originally at, if I go back to, well, 500 is going to be way too high. You can definitely see how that's obviously not good. So 25. So now we have normal maps for the skin. We have normal maps for the displacement. These have different intensity values. which is why we wanted to do the normal maps first. We could have created blend maps and blended the bump map with the displacement map, but then when you go to make a normal map from the displacement, you only get one level of intensity, and as we've seen here, you need different intensity levels for the bumps and for the displacement. So that's why we're doing the normal blending as the after step, as opposed to blending the displacements and then making a normal map. And so now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add another set of previews, and this time it's going to be again the diffuse, but now the normal map is going to be our combined blended map. And I'm going to say okay, I can bring that in here. And so you can see, if I compare that to the original, where there's a little bit of a hint to the veins or scarring, and if I compare it to just the displacement, when I look at this one, I can see I've got my bump texture showing, and I've got the veins obviously much stronger popping out. And we're going to do the same thing for the limbs. Normal map, the limb blend. Okay, and then I'll create the one for the torso. Torso, normal map. Okay. So now, one of the things you'll notice is that there are different ways for shader map to combine the two normal maps together, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. And so it defaults to this standard map. You have an additive, you have overlay. Overlay is the one that I like, at least for this particular set of maps. You can do which has the greater angle, rotation. We're back to standard. So I set these to overlay, and obviously feel free to experiment. Every map's going to be different, and so maybe one of the other modes gives you a better looking result. I'll drag in, so here we're looking at the limbs, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to change this to overlay as well. And then here is the torso, and we'll click this and set it to overlay. And so at this point, we have maps that you can see there is texture for the bump, and then obviously these big veiny scar things that really stand out. And you can go ahead now and probably want to save your shader map project. I'm not going to do that because I already have this saved out. I recreated this from scratch for the purposes of this video. But you're going to save your project, and you'll want to save out your normal maps. And then in Studio or Poser or whatever, you go in, you remove the bump nodes, and you put in normal map nodes. And then I myself use a tool called Reality for exporting from Studio into LuxRender, which is the tool I use to do all my final renders. And Reality will pick up the normal map settings, or you can explicitly find and locate the normal map settings in Reality. Make sure that the normal map checkbox is set, because otherwise it'll try to use the normal map as a bump map, and that's not going to give you the results you want. But this hopefully shows or gives you some insight to start playing around with how to merge a bump map and a displacement map for skins in Studio or Poser that you're then going to export for rendering in LuxRender. This is, something that's come up a number of times because of people looking to accomplish this with vascularity maps that are usually in the form of displacement, when then the figure has a bump map that the user wants to retain. And displacement in Lux, while it works, is one of those things that frustrates people when they don't fully get the settings. And displacement also requires more memory because you have to subdivide the figure at least once, oftentimes more than once, in order to get enough granularity in the geometry for the displacement engine to push things around. And so normal maps are, they use less memory. They're going to actually render faster. They'll render faster even than the bump maps, because a bump map in Lux is effectively having the derivatives calculated as if to generate what would have been a normal map where all the normals are pointing straight out. So the normal map actually involves less computation than a bump map does, and it gives pretty good results. I will include a couple of links in the description for this video to the forums where this originally was discussed, and then we'll see what happens from there. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them over on the RuntimeDNA forums. Thank you. Cheers.